people coming in here.
I've
Right, hopefully you're seeing the main screen there and not the one that's the presenter view. Yeah, I think that's okay. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Well, it's evening in Glasgow where I am, but it'll be afternoon where most of you are. I'm really sorry that we can't gather together in person. It's one of the things I've missed this last year or so with the isolation. Social skills have atrophied to almost nothing. But I guess we should give thanks that through the wonderful medium of the internet and Zoom, we can at least gather in this virtual format to share our hearts and spirits and try and maintain some sense of community. So thank you all for joining, and thanks to the ASD for inviting me to give this talk to you today. Now, for those of you who don't know me, this is my website, westerngeomancy.org. I'm a professional dowser and geomancer, and I've now been dowsing professionally for 20 years, although I've been dowsing in an amateur fashion for another 20 years, at least beyond that. I'm past president of the British Society of Dowsers. I served 2 terms as president. I'm a professional member on their register, also a tutor and an honorary life member of the Society, and recipient of the BSD Award, which is the Society's highest award that's given for exceptional services to dowsing and the Society. Also a member of the American Society and the Canadian Society, and a founder member of the Geomancy Group and co-chair of internationaldowsers.org with my co-host here, Susan Collins, the old water woman. These are the books I have written so far. I have a basic guide to technopathic stress, which is about the electrical magnetic hazards that we all face in everyday life. Dowsing Magic, books 1 and 2. Book 2 is the most recent one, and some of the material in that we will be covering a little bit today. Dowsing with Sigils, some of you may have done my Sigils workshop at conferences. It was after the feedback I got from the ASD conference that prompted me to write the book, in fact. And the other book I have going at the moment is Healing Sick Houses, which is a classic book by Roy and Anne Proctor, which came out in the year 2000, which is about when I started doing my geomancy training. And it's been out of print for quite some years now, and they asked me if I would be so kind to help them update it and produce the new edition. So that's the latest book, all available on my website. And then there's my combined colour wheel and pendulum chart, the Gardner Rosette, which I know some of you have used. So just to give honour to the teachers, because we don't come here just out of thin air. These are some of my teachers that I worked with over the years. Many of these are no longer with us and are in the realm of the sky dowsers. So in this way, we also invoke and give honour to our ancestors as well. So some big names in there, which I hope some of you will recognise. And if you were here at the start, you'll have heard Susan Collins mention me as a carrier of the sacred fire. This was my native name given to me by White Eagle at the 2014 ASD convention. So Kumshka, carrier of the sacred fire. So let's get on to our talk today. Now, this is one of those subjects when Sandy asked me if I would do a talk on Zoom, and she asked for a title and a synopsis. I sort of blithely came out with, oh yeah, well, let's do 10 ways to space clear your home. Little did I realize what a mountain this would be to climb in putting a presentation together. It's way too big for this talk. There's at least a full day workshop, if not a 2 or 3 day workshop, if we're going to get deeply into everything. So there are some things in this that we just simply won't have time to cover with today, but hopefully we'll have a chance in the future, because I do intend to develop aspects of this into workshops as we go along. So I'm going to start by looking at some home protection methods, and these are apotropaic methods. This is my favorite word at the moment, apotropaic. It means having the power to avert evil influences or bad luck. And it's the late 19th century word, comes from the Greek, meaning to turn away from. So it's to turn away or avert evil influences. So we're looking at things like the traditional hex signs in the Pennsylvania Dutch tradition, these symbols that are painted on barns as protective devices, usually variations of the flower of life symbols, often a six-petaled star or flower shape. And it's imported from Germanic traditions. It's not actually anything to do with Dutch. They say that the Dutch is actually a corruption of Deutsch. So it's Pennsylvania Deutsch is how one should say it. And nowadays they tend to be dismissed as just decorative devices. And they say they were not really just put there as protective symbols. They were just for decoration. But they very clearly do have a sort of talismanic aspect in that regard. And I think they're great. I'd really love seeing these when when in the States. Other apotropaic devices, things like horseshoes hung over a doorway. And traditionally it's said that if the horns are upwards, that's the horseshoe is collecting good luck into the property. If the horns are downwards, it spreads the good luck into the property. There are various interpretations of this. I've also heard it said that only witches are supposed to hang them upside down because it's unlucky to do it otherwise. It depends where in the country you are, I think. I think this comes from the idea that the little folk, the fairy realm, don't like the touch of cold iron or cold steel. And this might give us a clue as to why earth acupuncture using steel rods is such an effective technique, because the earth energies do get very disrupted by cold iron. Other things we could look at is gargoyles. I love when you find a decent gargoyle on the European cathedrals and churches. Now, there's a difference in that a gargoyle is a water spout. It's designed with the long neck to collect water from the roof and channel it away from the building. But they're also protective devices to ward off evil spirits. A grotesque is like a gargoyle, but it's something that's not designed to carry water. And the word supposedly comes from a legend of Saint Romanus, who was in the French town of Rouen and slew a mighty fire-breathing dragon with his crucifix. And he found that he couldn't burn the entire body because as it breathed fire, its neck and its head was resistant to burning. So they ended up cutting the head off and nailing the neck to the wall of the church, where it hung as this protective gargoyle to banish any evil spirits. So that's where the word is said to come from, and gargoyle is from the French. But similar figures have been found in other cultures, going back as far as ancient Greece and Egypt. So it's quite a common device. And I love that nowadays we even have modern gargoyles, such as this one here, in the shape of the alien xenomorph from the film. And a lot of people thought that this was an ancient device and wondering where Ridley Scott got his idea from. But this was actually carved relatively recently by a modern stonemason. And this is on Paisley Abbey, which is just outside Glasgow, when it was having some repairs done a few years ago. Other devices, looking at the Chinese tradition, spirit animal carvings on the roof. This is an example of a roof from the Forbidden City in Beijing. And you have different carved animals, which are totem animals that are designed to protect against different adverse influences, up to and including fire. And the dragon represents the emperor and good luck. Lions represent the power of the owner of the building, and so on. 9 is the maximum number that you're allowed to have, apart from this example here, which is the Hall of Supreme Harmony, which is the emperor's throne room. That's the most important room in the Forbidden City. Now, these were also thought to control fire, and yellow was also used on the imperial buildings, and most of the walls and columns are red, as this is the most auspicious color, representing wealth and honor. But red also represents fire. So the one exception of this in the Forbidden City is the library, which had a black roof, because black symbolizes water. However, this didn't prove too successful, as during the Ming Dynasty, the library was nearly consumed in a disastrous fire. So after that, they started putting huge urns of water around the complex, which are still there today, just in case of any fire. Other examples we can have are like finials on roofs. That's the pointy bits you get at the end of roof eaves. And these have an interesting effect in that they ionize the air around them. So it tends to help dissipate charge and balance the atmospheric charges, so reduces the chance of a lightning strike. But they also had the apotropaic effect of stopping witches landing on the roof. So they're a protective device in that sense. Again, this varies depending on where you're coming from. And I know there are some houses where they actually have little ledges on the sides of the chimneys, which are said to be there to allow witches to have a little rest on. This particular roof is in a town in France called Sars-Poterie, which has a long tradition of glass making. And these glass finials are made at the local glass workshop. I was out there doing a dowsing workshop many years ago, and there was quite a lot of the buildings in the town had these. So if we look at, there's all sorts of these external devices. If we look at some of the internal methods we have, one of the most traditional is the corn dolly. And these arose from harvest rituals and were adapted for house protection. So traditionally, the last sheaf of the harvest was made into a corn dolly to provide a home for the corn goddess, the spirit of the land. And the corn dolly was kept in the house of the head farmer over the winter. And then it was ploughed back into the ground at the start of the next sowing season. So they've kind of evolved from that, but they are very common now. In many people have them in houses as little protective devices. And I used to like making these actually when I was younger. And I would put little bags of herbs inside, with some protective herbs and things, and hang little trinkets and charms from them. So they're fun to make. In a similar vein, of course, in North America, we have the dream catchers, traditionally used as protective charms, particularly for infants to stop bad dreams. And, they're designed like a spider web to filter out any negative energies coming in. Middle Europe, places like Turkey and the Middle East, you have evil eye amulets, or nazar as they're properly called. And these are designed in the shape of an eye so that they attract the gaze of somebody when they're coming into a house or coming into a room. So they're usually placed just inside a doorway. So the first thing that you see is the nazar, which avoids the evil eye being cast on the inhabitants of the house. And they're very common nowadays. You can get bunches of them in shops, and you find them as general decoration on fabric cushions and furnishings and so on. And this notion of the evil eye goes back to ancient Greece, so it's at least the 6th century BCE. Witch bottles and balls, another European tradition. And historically, the person who believed they had a spell put on them would create the witch bottle. And it usually contains urine, hair or nail clippings, or red thread, and often some herbs like rosemary, and particularly nails and pins put in it. And the idea is then that the bottle captures any evil which becomes impaled on the pins and needles. So traditionally they're hidden in a house, usually under the hearth or perhaps the doorway or buried in a wall somewhere. And these still turn up today in old houses that are being renovated. You often find these under the floor and so on. They were also used as an offering to the spirit of place. And they're incorporated into the fabric of the building during construction. Slightly later use is fishermen's weights, the glass fisherman balls that you find. They're used in a similar fashion. And shoes, another bizarre thing. All sorts of things are found in walls and under the threshold. And the shoe one is thought to have come from a parish priest in the 13th century who was reputed to have trapped the devil inside a boot. That's how that one's supposed to have arisen. But you often find, bones or mummified cats are amazingly popular for some reason. And this goes right through into the early 20th century. It may still happen today, I don't know. I haven't heard of any recently. So, there's all these traditions in home protection and folklore. And I'd love, if we have time at the end, I'd love to hear some of your own if you know of any. So moving on to, from that, let's look at some traditional protection methods. Seasonal rituals are very popular, usually at one of the main festivals of the year, one of the 8 main festivals. In Scotland, Hogmanay is a big festival. It's a bigger festival than Christmas even. Up until the early 60s, Christmas used to be a normal working day in Scotland. So New Year was always the biggest party time. Lang me your lum reek is a traditional Scottish Hogmanay blessing, and it's usually said as it's presented with a gift of coal to the host of the house that you're going into. Means long may your chimney smoke, or means your hearth will never go out. So that's a traditional Hogmanay blessing. Some of the other traditions we had, there's seining the house, and seining means smudging, really. And often people would come in with like whole burning branches of a plant like mistletoe, juniper, or rue, which is where we get the phrase "you'll rue the day" from. So this is the kind of European version of smudging. Swinging the fireballs is a tradition that still happens in Stonehaven, up on the northeast coast near Aberdeen, where the young men of the village will swing these burning balls of fire in these metal cages filled with burning firewood, swing them around their head as they process through the town to drive out any evil spirits and negative energies. There's the first foot rituals at Hogmanay. After the bells have gone, the first person through the door is the first foot, and it's supposed to be a tall, dark, handsome man. It's considered very unlucky if it's a blonde woman or a red-headed man. So it has to be a tall, dark, handsome guy. And traditionally, he would bring a bag of salt, which is representative of food in the kitchen, a lump of coal so that the fire never goes out, and of course some whiskey. I mean, I can remember when I was a small boy at New Year in Aberdeen, you would have people coming around the houses, and they would just wander around the streets, and they'd have a half bottle of whiskey in their pocket. So they would just drink a small glass, which meant you could visit one house, have a small dram, and then carry on, and you'd last most of the night. And nowadays, this doesn't tend to happen, particularly the last few years. It's really dropped off, and I very seldom see anybody doing this in Glasgow these days. So the salt is interesting. Not only does it represent the food in the kitchen, salt is also a good traditional psychic protection device. So scattering some salt around the boundary of the house is another means of protecting the house at New Year. Meaning that any sort of negative influences are kept out of the house. You would also open the front door and one of the windows just before the bells rang. Is particularly if you've done the smudging with the burning branches, because the place is full of smoke. So you would throw open all the windows to let the old year out, and then you'd open the front door with the first foot to let the new year in. Other protective devices, you can quarter an onion and place it in the corners of the house and leave it overnight, and this soaks up all the negative energy, and then you would bury it the next day. I've also seen a raw egg used in this method, in this manner. You place a raw egg in the center of the house, and then you'd go out and dig a hole and break it into the ground and bury it. And interestingly, I remember when I was at college, I was staying in a house, I was sharing a house with 4 other people, and there was one egg left in the fridge on New Year's Eve. I remember this very clearly. And we came up in the morning, and I was going to have it for breakfast, and the fridge was empty. And I was the first person up. So I was asking everybody else if they'd seen it, and nobody had seen it. And then in the afternoon, I happened to walk out into the back garden, and the egg was sitting in the middle of the lawn. And nobody admitted to doing that, and we hadn't spoken about this ritual. That was just one of those strange coincidences. Don't know what happened there. Had somebody moved it? Was this an act of teleportation? Who knows? But I still remember that. Epiphany rituals, 12th night. I learned this from a friend in California, actually, but it is a Germanic tradition where you chalk CMB with a cross and then the date of the year on your threshold on Epiphany, which is protects your house for the rest of the year. There's some variations in the format in this, like in the example here, there are crosses between each letter. Sometimes it's just one cross. And I was told that the CMB represents the 3 wise men, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. But I've since read elsewhere it stands for Christus Mansionem Benedicat, meaning may Christ bless this dwelling. So that's a traditional Germanic house blessing rather. Moving on, there's some other Scottish rituals. Most of these seem to be related to fire, actually. We do like a good fire ritual in Scotland, I have to say. Burning the clavey. The clavey is, you can see in the picture here, is a half barrel filled with burning tar wood, which is carried through the town on January the 11th. Now, in the old Julian calendar, which was 11 days behind, this would be Hogmanay, in fact. So it's carried through the town, and it's used to start a big beacon fire on a hillside just outside the town. Up in Shetland, we have Up Helja, where a torchlit procession of people dressed as Vikings marches through the town, and at the end, a Viking longship is set alight. So it's possible that many of these traditions came from the Vikings. And this one happens on the last Tuesday in January. So it's quite common in January to have these fire festivals. In the summer, we have the common ridings in the Scottish borders. Most of the towns in the Scottish borders will have these on various weekends where anybody who can ride a horse will get out and they will process around the boundaries of the parish. So this is beating the bounds, this is walking the boundary as a sort of invoking the protection of the spiritual place. And this comes from the sort of 11th century when there was a need to reinforce the town boundaries during times of strife with the English. The Burryman Festival in South Queensferry, this happens on August the 11th. So remembering that 11-day discrepancy, this is probably a harvest festival, a Lammas festival. And here this chap, the Burryman, walks around the town, and he's wearing this all-over woolen suit that is covered with burrs, these prickly burrs from the plant. He's completely covered from head to foot in these, so he can't sit down. He has to walk around the town carrying these floral staffs, and he's helped by two assistants there who help him carry the weight. And he walks through every street in the town, and everywhere he stops, he's given a little sip of whiskey through a straw. And this goes on from 6 in the morning, and it's usually beyond past 6 at night by the time he finishes. So, you know, it's a huge effort, requires a lot of stamina just to do that. So again, we've got this idea of, you know, walking the boundaries and walking through the town just to bring blessing and banish any negative energies. So that's some of the sort of traditional folkloric methods of house protection. So looking at some shamanic techniques, there's a lot of sort of meditational techniques that we can use. Now I find these are best when you're away from home or when you've just returned after being away from home. It's difficult to be objective about issues affecting the space when you've been living in it for a long period of time. You know, it's very hard to see where the problems lie. So it's best to do this when you've just come back from holiday or something like that. Or when you're away, you know, it's a good way of just tuning in just to see if everything's okay. So it's based on the idea that the home is a reflection of self. It's like you. So you're actually talking to yourself when you're doing this. You know, treat the rooms as little aspects of yourself. They have their own personalities, they have their own feeling and their own attitudes. You know, so you can ask what is troubling them, and what can you do to help. You know, so get your pendulums out, and you know you can get into dialogue with the spirit of place, with the spirit of your home. So you start by picturing yourself standing outside your front door, and I invite you to do this now if you wish. So just picture yourself in your mind's eye, standing outside the front door. And then you imagine the door opening and you walk through the door and into the house, into your hallway or wherever the first room happens to be. So which room is calling to you when you do this? You know, which room is drawing you to it? What room attracts you? What feels like it has good energy? And which room repels you? You know, which room do you not want to go into? So you can dialogue with your pendulum here and just ask, you know, what room has the problem? You know, what can I do to help it? So, you know, this is a good little technique to do. One of the methods for doing in general cleaning in this case is the sort of white light sieve method, where you imagine there's a white light grid, a very fine grid like a sieve above the house. And as you're breathing in and getting into your meditational state, you imagine the white light coming down and have it shaking side to side, like you're sifting out the negativity and just pushing all the sort of negative energy particles down through the house. And you just picture this white light sieve passing down through the entire building and feel it going through your body as it goes. And then you push it out down through the house and into the ground. And when it's in the ground, you can ask the earth elementals to disperse this and take it away. And then you can just seal it using a cross underneath the house with a circle around it, or some similar symbol like that. So this is a very good method to use if you're away from home in a hotel room and you feel it needs some protection. So just get into a meditative state and go through that little ritual. Now, other means we can use, there is the sort of intuitive means of feeling the energies in the room. This is a kind of intuitive feng shui healing technique. We can train ourselves to be more sensitive to these energies by learning how to sense the energies around us. And this is an exercise I learned very early on in my dowsing. You may have done something similar, I don't know. But you can feel by using your non-dominant hand and the chakra in the palm of your hand acts as a sort of receptor, and you can feel the energy. So you can feel where it is sluggish, or it might feel dark and in need of brightening up. So you can just walk around the house with your hand like this and just test various areas and make a note of any areas that feel sluggish or dark, and then you can return and apply healing using your favorite method with your pendulum or other techniques. So I'll give you a little exercise here just to learn how to feel color. The colors here I'm using are the major rosette, the major wheel. These are 8 traditional dowsing colors. If you have the pendulum chart download, it has the same colors on that. So you can use your hand just by putting your hand up to the screen in front of the color here and try and sense what the color feels like. So I'll show you a screen with each of these colors on the wheel on it, and I'll just leave the color up for 5 seconds. So just put your hand up to the screen as we go through these and just see if you can get a sense of what each color feels like. So here we go. Now just put the palm of your hand up to the screen and just see, what does it feel like? Okay, so hope you all got something from that. I know it's quite difficult doing it on the screen. It works better if you have a coloured card. It's much easier to feel this. But yeah, this is something we can all do. It is a natural dowsing ability, if you like. There are some people who are completely blind who can tell what the colour is just by holding their hand over it. So, it is definitely possible for us to do this. So then, of course, we would raise the frequency of the color or the area that's sluggish using our pendulum or our bobbers and just our focus and tension. So I'm using my International Dowsers pendulum pouch here. Thank you, Susan. So this is my normal dowsing responses here. You may have different ones. I know a lot of people who have trained using like the letter to Robin technique will have different responses for this. So for me, I have my search neutral position is going towards and away from me. It's quite difficult. I have to hold this up by my head here to do this. If my pendulum just goes side to side, that means can't answer the question. It's not making sense. Ask something else. And then my yes response for me is a clockwise circle. And my no response is a anti-clockwise circle. So when we're sending and connecting and minimizing energy, for me, it's the same response as the no. So if I start my pendulum going quite fast in an anti-clockwise circle, then I am disconnecting the energy. I am minimizing any detrimental energy, and I'm visualizing the energy being scrambled and neutralized and removed from the room or the item, whatever it is I'm doing. And then when the pendulum stops or changes response, I know that I've done enough in that direction. So I would then move on and start it in the maximizing direction, which for me is clockwise, the same as my yes. And at this point, I would be putting light and healing into the space, sending my intention to heal the space, and asking the white light to come in and lift the energy level of the space or the object. And you just keep doing that and visualize your healing being applied until the pendulum again stops or changes direction. So that's our basic techniques there. So we can do this in the room. If we find an area that's sluggish, we can do it with the bobber or the pendulum, just starting with our minimize and asking that all detrimental frequencies and energies be scrambled, neutralized, and removed as appropriate, etc. You can make up your own affirmations here. I know Susan Collins has a good protocol on this, which if you ask her, I'm sure she'll love to send you one. And then once the energy has been scrambled or removed, you then start your maximize direction and ask that all the frequencies be maximized to the highest possible extent in accordance with the highest intelligence of nature as appropriate, and so on. And keep visualizing the energy being raised here until you get another response from the pendulum. Now, with the charts that you've got on the downloads, you can use this to assess the before and after. You can check the energy level of the room using the plus and minus pendulum chart. And you can also check the color as well. If you want to raise the frequency using the color, you should find that it changes. On the color chart, I'd say purple is probably the most beneficial color for house healing purposes. White is fairly neutral. Black would be the most detrimental. What else have we got? We've got red is, trying to find a pendulum chart here. Red is warming and fiery, so that is good for putting energy in. Green, yellow, a bit sort of sickly. There might be some illness there or some germs. So blue and purple, I would say, are the ones to aim for. Blue is very calming energy, and purple is very spiritual healing energy. Obviously, it depends on your particular color psychology that you subscribe to, but that's the fairly common attributes. So when we're doing the work in healing the rooms here, we can get assistance from elemental devices here, using some of the 4 classical elements, the air, water, fire, and earth. So we might find aids like the salt and egg rituals that we mentioned earlier, the onion, garlic, bunches of garlic around the doors and windows. Very good for vampires, don't you know? Good for other bogeymen as well. Crystals, I'm sure we've all used crystals to harmonize detrimental energy lines when they come into the house. Things like organite, other gadgets, other widgets would probably fall under this category as well. We can use water, charged or blessed water, flower or vibrational essences, and essential oils. You can paint sigils or symbols on doors, for example, in essential oils. So once it's dried, they won't show up, but it still has that resonance on the door or in the room. So that's a good way of doing little invisible healings. And for blessing water is relatively simple. We just do the same technique with the pendulum. You can douse the water before and after using the colors on the chart. We can douse the energetic level of the water using a 1 to 10 ray chart. We can douse the energetic balance using the plus and minus chart. So again, we just start our pendulum in the minimized motion over the glass of water, asking that all pollutants and detrimental qualities are neutralized, scrambled, and removed. And you continue until your pendulum stops or changes. And then we start in the maximized motion over the glass, affirming that all the beneficial qualities are maximized to their highest possible level as appropriate. And then you can go back and douse the color and the energetic balance of the water again. This is water into wine. It really does work. Let me just have a glass. Cheers. So examples of air elemental aids are things like drums, and these are usually applied as a sort of shaking up of the energy. When you've established the sluggish areas in the room, you can go around with your drum, beating your drum, which will shake up and loose the energy. Bells have the same effect. Tibetan singing bowls. I use a singing bowl quite often for this. And singing bowls are quite good in that they also assess the energy as well as fine tuning it. So if you're doing the singing bowl and it actually starts ringing and not making a smooth tone, you know that the energy is still a bit sluggish there and you need to do a little bit more work. Many people use tuning forks, like bioresonance forks, things like this. And then, of course, smudging, you know, the traditional methods with the white sage and the feathers. Smudging, of course, could also be classified as fire, since you have fire involved in this. Candles, carrying a candle round or putting candles at the windows as an example of fire as an elemental aid. So, you know, this is particularly common at things like Hanukkah and Christmas and other seasonal festivals like that. Fire ceremonies, very good for closing the healing of a house, used in a lot of intuitive feng shui stuff, where you start a fire in a pot or a cauldron in the middle of the house using some brandy and some salt, just equal amounts, a small shot glass of each, and you set fire to it and you put your intention into the flames as it's burning down, and that sends the intention out and spreads throughout the house. So fire ceremonies are tremendously powerful. You know, anything involving fire is a really good way to set intention into something. It can also have negative effects as well. Like, you know, I quite often come across stone circles where somebody's had a fire against one of the stones, and you can feel the sort of the energy in the stone is not very happy about that. You know, often the stone will crack, in fact, if it's been left for too long. Talismanic methods. This is a whole other workshop, really, but I'll talk you through what we do here. If you did my sigils workshop, you'll be a little bit familiar with the techniques here. Again, this is something I sometimes do. It depends on the client and whether they're amenable to the idea or not. I used to do this more often, actually. You make a little talisman out of parchment or paper or something like this. Just two circles of paper that's connected by a little hinge of paper, if you like. And you would use a suitable magic square. In this particular example, I'm using the sun, which is a good one for protection. So this is the magic square of the sun. And then on the other side, we have, this is the seal of the sun. And this is the sigil of the intelligence of the sun. So you do all these planetary attributes on one side. And then on the other side of the discs, I would draw a plan of the house on one half. And then on the other half, I would design a sigil and put that on the other half. So, you know, there's various things you can do here. It depends on what planets you're wanting to invoke. You then design a basic activation ceremony. And in this, you would use the appropriate planetary day and the planetary hour, planetary incense, and other planetary attributes. You know, this is all part of the what's the word I'm looking for? The idea that everything has the similar attributes, correspondences. That's the word I'm looking for. Law of correspondences. So you would design and include all these different planetary attributes, like the color of the sun is yellow or gold, so you might use gold ink and so on. And design a little ceremony and then bless and charge the talisman, activate it with your best healing intention. And then you would wrap it in a piece of silk, which in the case of the sun here would be yellow, of course, and then seal it inside an envelope. And that's usually then placed under the hearth or under the entrance to the property. So that's a good traditional magic one to use. Now we could go on to look at feng shui, but we really haven't got time to get into that one today. You know, there's lots of intuitive things you can do, like sharp corners are bad feng shui in the space. So this is a sharp corner in my apartment where I have some Japanese bells hung on it just to shake up the energy. Now, if you want to know more about feng shui, my colleague in International Dowser, Susan Collins, is running a Dowsing for Feng Shui and Space Clearing workshop on March the 28th. So you can book that on her website, dowser.ca. There's your free plug, Susan. So lastly, let's get into some dowsing methods. Again, there's so many different workshops we could do on dowsing techniques alone, but let's just look at a few ways we can apply healing remotely using map dowsing work. Now, I always do map dowsing before visiting a property because it does save time when you get there on the day. But sometimes, if the client is very far away, remote healing is the only method available. And I do have clients all over the place, and quite a few clients in North America that I've worked on. So here are some techniques that I use. Many of these are discussed in my book, Dowsing Magic Book 2. So here's an example house plan. This is from the book, actually. And in the example here, I've got one water vein, two energy lays, which are the red lines, one negative curry grid crossing, and one interdimensional portal. And the two little cog symbols here and here might be power objects, or they could be EMF emitting devices like Wi-Fi routers and phones and stuff. Not relevant to this particular tutorial. So first thing usually to attack is the interdimensional portal. This is like a vortex, it's like a gap where interdimensional energies come through. And the best way to tackle these is just to visualize sealing them with your hand, or you can use a magical tool or a wand or just your pointed finger to draw a cross or a pentagram over it and just seal it with intention. So in the case of the remote dowsing in a plan, I would usually actually draw it or place a sticker over it and draw on top of that. We can work on energy lines on the lays. I would normally treat these in real life using wooden wands and flower essences. So I can adapt that technique remotely by using toothpicks on the lines to pin the lines, and you can still apply flower essences to the toothpicks. In a similar fashion, I would do earth acupuncture on a water line by hammering a steel rod into the water. And on the map, you can just use push pins. Does exactly the same thing. You might feel the need to try and divert lines in some instances. So you can actually use thread and push pins to divert the lines around the property, like this. Or you can just use pure intention. So I've read various means of doing this on energy lines. This is one that Gladys McCoy uses, is to put these triple circles around each line where it enters the property. I haven't actually tried this one actually, so if anybody uses this, I'd love to hear from you at the end. A method that Fountain International use is to change the color using our pendulum method that we've gone through. Change the color to purple, which is the sacred color, and then you edge it with golden lines to seal it in place, which neutralizes the energy and stops it spreading into the house with any detrimental intent. There's other intentional methods we can use. We can try and divert the lines around the house or over the house. Some people put copper wire around the house. So, you can do this to divert the energy lines just by placing copper wire around the plan. All these methods that you can use. It's good fun doing these because, you're often inspired just by your imagination. You do come up with some amazingly effective techniques. Such as the one I'm just about to show you now. This is house healing on the plan using nothing more than a martini glass and a halogen spotlight. So I was just experimenting with this recently as I was putting this workshop together. So we have one martini glass. It has to be a martini glass. It won't work with anything else. And you add your flower essence or you charge the water with your pendulum, putting in your best healing intention into the water. And we know from the work of Dr. Emoto that this is an effective technique. We just love the water, give it our love, and apply our best healing intention to it. And then you need a halogen spotlight for this, which has to be placed directly over the glass. Now, it can't be an ordinary lamp. It has to be a halogen spotlight, one of these with the small reflective bulb and a very small filament. It's crucial that you have a point source or as close to a point source in the filament as that you can get. And you'll see that it projects through the glass here, and you get this lovely double circle-y thing happening like this. So if we can position it so that the circles enclose the property, we can then send our healing intention and visualize the light carrying that charged water, that blessed water, and the intention we put into that onto the plan and spreading out to the edge of the circles. And then down to your pendulum, how long you need to leave the light in place to transfer the healing intention to the plan. We can use things like, you can put some food coloring in the water if you want to bring that purple color to the fore. In this case, I just put a colored gel over the lamp. So again, we're just applying our healing intention and using our pendulum to assess how long it needs to stay there. And use our charts again, use the plus minus charts to see the difference before and after. So once you've sent the energy enough and the healing has been done, you would then draw 3 circles in gold ink around the property. Again, the gold just acts as a sealing intention, and the triple circle is like this triple seal. So you're sealing the healing in place around the property. Do a final check that everything is okay and that the work is good. And there you go. So say I have actually done this successfully. This does actually work. So if you have the bits, I encourage you to try it. Or do something else. As I say, your imagination in these things often comes up with some very effective techniques. And you need to go with that active imagination. Very often that's your subconscious, your higher self is telling you, try this, and most of the time it will work. So I hope we're okay for time here, but that's us basically. Thank you for listening. Here's where you can find me. Facebook/Scott Dowser, Twitter @GrumGeo, YouTube/Western Geomancy, and the website westerngeomancy.org. So I shall have a glass of water and stop screen sharing. And we're ready for questions. Lidra, are you going to manage this? No, okay. I'll just look through the chat here. Let's see what I got.
Graham, did you want the questions from the emails first?
Sure, on you go. Yeah. Somebody just asked me to put up the contact links again, so let me just share that screen again while we're talking. So there was some email questions, I believe. Are you going to read them out?
I'm putting them into the chat.
Oh, okay. I'm not looking at the chat at the moment. That's probably why I can't see it.
Basically, the first question is that a woman had a mouse or mice in her basement for the first time this winter. Any suggestions for space clearing for repelling mice?
Yeah, well, again, any of these techniques will probably be effective in repelling mice. An even better method is to try and assume the thought form of a cat. I find that work really well. If you just project the thought form of a cat into the room. Like we have a favorite family cat that was my wife's that she was very attached to when it died. But she still has it on her computer screensaver screen. So she knows how it looks, and we just visualize this cat whenever we feel the need for it. You can also try, in a meditational shamanic state, you can try connecting with the spirit of the mouse, with the deva of the mice, if you like, and just explain the situation and ask them kindly if they would, stop bothering you. I've done this successfully with moles, where there's been some garden moles have been coming up in the middle of a stone circle on somebody's lawn. And I just sat down in the circle and, you got into this dowsing dialogue with the spirit of the mole and explained the situation, and they stopped coming in. So, lots of techniques we can use here. What else about? Okay, I can see the chat. Now, let's see now. Any suggestions for clearing a home to invite a new love into my life? Been way too quiet for too long on the dating front. Good question. Yeah, well, I would invoke some sort of suitable love energy. What color on the chart would be good for that? You probably want a pink or something like that, I guess, and just infuse the space with that energy. There's a technique you can use called a psychic lighthouse, where you imagine a lighthouse above the property with a beam sweeping round. So if you imagine a lighthouse with, let's say, a pink beam with the intention that it's going to attract somebody in that regard, that would probably work. I would say ethically, you might be on questionable ground doing that. So I would have a very, strong and thorough conversation with my pendulum before I actually went ahead and did that.
Thank you. The next one is, how do you frame or contextualize your dowsing or geomancy services for people who would benefit, but who are not inclined to be open-minded or have an old paradigm suspicion?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, you totally have to adapt your own particular parameters depending on the clients you're dealing with. There are some clients who are perfectly happy about me talking about fairies at the bottom of the garden, whereas other clients have a more scientific bent. You don't want to talk about that, so you might just talk about some electromagnetic variations or something like that. You completely have to adapt your terminology to suit that of the client. And very often that will mean not telling them exactly what you've found or exactly what you think is going on, because they might not be wanting to hear that. So yeah, that's something you have to, that's one of the reasons I like going on site visits as opposed to working remotely. I like to get into the sort of technical ins and outs of things. And often you get a sense of what the client is amenable to just by sitting down with a cup of tea when you arrive. So yeah, I think that's a very important part of any consultation.
I've also been requested to post the chart again, so that that's up for everybody if you'd like to see it. And then there's a question whether you can post the list again. I don't know which list they're talking about. Probably your slides. I guess they're asking, are your slides going to be available afterwards?
Only in the sense of they're in the recording. They'll be in the recording of the talk, but that's, no, they're not going to be available otherwise. What else have we got? Oh, there was a second part of that question. People who are not inclined to be open-minded or have old paradigm suspicions, reference Feng Shui, Vastu Shastra, whatever, or do you just not make the attempt and only work with people who gravitate to you without the extra nudge? Yeah, you tend to find that you get who you need to get. People don't gravitate to you if they're not of that mind. You just don't tend to get those people coming your way. It's usually people who are sympathetic to the idea of somebody coming in and dowsing that will be attracted to you.
Okay, Susan has chimed in that she sometimes says she's doing landscaping, which I think is very creative.
Yeah, landscaping is good. If I'm out and somebody, like a member of the public, asks me what I'm doing, as has happened once when I was doing a pre-purchase survey for somebody, and there was another bunch of prospective buyers looking around the property, I just said I'm doing an environmental survey. Often I will wear a high-vis jacket, and I even have a hard hat if necessary, if I'm having to go out in a public street or something like that. So yeah, The
next one seems to be, how do you clear a mentally challenged person who seems to continually have cracks to attract non-beneficial energies into the house?
Difficult, that, yeah, very difficult at times. I do have an ongoing client at the moment who has a highly autistic son, who has the most amazing nocturnal experiences. I mean, they've actually set videos up in his room, and he has streams and streams of orbs coming in, showing up on the video. It is quite something. I have had about 3 attempts on healing his room, but he keeps moving to another bedroom where it all happens again. So that's an ongoing one. It can be very difficult in some circumstances because those kind of people are just open to these sorts of energies. So, we can only do what we can. The best way is to try and teach them methods of self-control. And again, that would depend on their particular mental state and the family as well.
And then someone is commenting on your headset that it's unique and they'd like to know if it's a type of protection device.
Well, it is, yeah. This is an air tube headset. If I take one out to show you. So yeah, the last 6 inches or so are just an air tube. So the wire, which, as you know, on a cell phone, will transmit the EMFs up the wire, so you actually get more exposure in your ear if you're wearing a wired headset. That all stops at this little nodule here. So the rest is just air vibration that's going into your ear. So yeah, it stops the EMFs going up into your brain, basically. Not that I'm using a mobile just now, but you know, it's an easy headset to use for these things.
That's great, thank you. And in terms of the recording, folks, so this will be in the ASD, the American Society of Dowsers website. The recording will be up fairly soon, so if you'd like to re-listen to it, you can do that there.
Is that going to be a limited time deal?
That is an excellent question. I'm not entirely sure what the timing is. I think it's probably going to be in the archives.
Okay, cool.
Does anyone else have a question? We've got 3 more minutes to the top of the hour. If anyone's got something that they just have to know about. Otherwise, of course, you can always reach out to Graham, and I'm sure he'd be happy to help you. Brittany,
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Sorry, Graham, go ahead. I was going to say, Brittany, if you can type it into the chat, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
They'd like to know more about your disc?
The major disc, yeah. The major disc, I talk about this in one of my more basic talks, was a color wheel that was developed in the early 20th century by a French dowser called Henri Méger, hence the name. It's most commonly used in radiesthesia, which is a sort of French system of dowsing healing. But it's also used by water dowsers, where the different colors will represent you know, the different qualities of water. So like blue is drinkable water, purple is holy water, black is geopathically stressed water, and so on. So the various attributes. It's because of that that I developed my Gardner rosette, which we saw earlier. I have in here somewhere. So many props, so little time. So there's my Gardner rosette, which has the 8 colors of the major disc, plus some additional ones down the side here, which I created because they were useful for earth energy dowsing. So I have gold, copper, gold, and silver, metallic colors represented, because a lot of these major dragon currents that we come across tend to show up in these metallic colors. So yeah, so it just gives you some more options.
Great. There's one other question about this. Woman has a room that's attached to her barn, and she'd like to make it feel more part of the house.
What?
A room built into the barn feels disconnected from house and barn. Now, is the room an extension? Was it built after the house was built? Often you do find there are boundary issues with extensions because the house has an etheric psychic boundary, just as your body has an aura. The house is a reflection of yourself. So there is a psychic boundary created when the house is built. And if you build an extension onto this and don't address that, very often that boundary is still there. So you get this sense of the extension part being separate from the house. So that's a case of energetically disconnecting that part of the boundary and then mentally redrawing it to include the extension.
Another, what I think is probably an excellent question, is there anything that you can't do with space clearing from a distance that you have to be in person to do well?
Yes, I can't survey for electromagnetic issues. You know, I can get a sense that there is some problems with it, with dowsing, but you can't really do anything to get accurate measurements or advise the client on what to do with them unless you're on site. I always find, I mean, the reason I prefer to be on site is that I'm quite a technical dowser, so I like to get into the nitty gritty of things. But very often just doing the remote work, you know, you might miss something. Just being on site and talking to the client often produces a lot more information that you're just not getting when you're working remotely. It might just be something in the neighborhood that crops up, you know, that you're not aware of looking at a map. You know, there might be a huge hill or something nearby that's affecting the energies. You know, all these sorts of things you only get from when you're actually being on site.
Okay, and I think lastly, Susan Collins would like to know if you use meters to measure EMFs.
Yes. Yes, I use meters to get accurate measurements of EMFs, various meters. Yes, whole other talk.
Okay, well, Grahame, I'm certain that if we kept this open, people would come up with so many questions. Your talk was brilliant. You gave us a ton of information to sort through and to learn from and to reach out to you with additional questions. So we'll have your contact information posted so that people who'd like to learn more can do that. And I would just like to personally thank you on behalf of the ASD for a fantastic workshop. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. So I really did bite off more than I could chew with that one, I think. But I can see this developing into something larger over the next year or so. There's almost certainly another book coming out of this. So anyway, thank you all for coming along, and I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And it's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you.